we want to welcome Dale Sharon back today for Women in Art Part 2 for the Mirowitz Center program. And it's just a delight to have this special program. And Dale, we just love hearing about all the wonderful art, and I'm going to turn it over to you today.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I'm so glad to see everyone again. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to continue with our topic, Women and Art, on how women are depicted in paintings, prints, and in sculpture. All right. This has to be one of my favorite cartoons. I think it's great. It portrays perhaps the most famous woman in art, the Mona Lisa, as she might actually have looked. The Mona Lisa has been acclaimed as the best known, the most visited, the most written about, and the most sung about work of art in the world. This is crazy. But the Guinness Book of World Records lists the Mona Lisa as having the highest insurance value of any painting in the world. You want to guess how much? Anybody? $850 million in 2016. Well, was she idealized and beautified, as this cartoon humorously suggests? Well, truthfully, almost all women until the 20th century were idealized. So she probably was as well. And it certainly is understandable. I mean, if I were having my portrait painted, I would probably ask the artist to take off 10 pounds and get rid of some of the wrinkles. Do you think you guys might do the same thing? I think we all would. It bears noting that art holds a mirror up to culture. Physical ideals are manifestations of the culture that they come in. Maybe somewhere in history, wrinkles might have been admired. And we know that being an ample woman, not slender, was the taste in many cultures in history. It was seen as good and healthy to have curves showing fertility. Rather than a stable set of features, physical beauty is an ever-morphing construct. And the role of women is just as fluid, depending on the time and culture. Going back through the ages, we think of the idealized goddesses and mythological characters portrayed in ancient Greek and Roman art. By the 15th century, portraits depicted realistic human beings, usually commissioned by the wealthy to be idealized versions of their loved ones. In modern times, examples of the depiction of women in the visual arts cover the gamut. For example, during World War II, the government had a propaganda campaign to portray women in the workforce as part of the war effort. I mean, do you remember Rosie the Riveter? Well, today we'll focus on women throughout different eras who are depicted in different styles and in different roles. Our focus will be on women as heroines, religious figures, working women, and women of leisure. So let's begin with heroines. Women were at times depicted as heroic, as virtuous, as brave, as courageous, and here are a few of our all-time favorites. Judith is the hero of this story from the Apocrypha, as she came to the rescue when the Assyrian army, led by General Holofernes, who is right here, he kind of looks like an antique-Greek sculpture to me, laid siege to her city of Bethulia. He cut off their water supply, and after 34 days of siege, Judith charmed the general with her beauty. Boldly infiltrating the Assyrian camp, brave and beautiful Judith dined with Holofernes, seduced him, and once he was drunk, she beheaded him with the help of her maid. Judith put the head on a spike, held it up to show the opposing army, and they fled in fright. It's been a favorite story of feminists for centuries. Judith is shown as a physically powerful woman, a visible indication of her inner courage. Several years ago, a 10-year-old boy on one of my tours said to me that she had arms like Mark McGuire, which I thought was incredibly descriptive. Although the story is about a heroine and Judith is powerfully portrayed, she has a very soft expression. She doesn't look like she's ready to kill someone, but rather she looks like she could be ready to bake brownies. She was heroic, but still portrayed as feminine. Giorgio Vasari was one of the foremost artists of the 16th century in Italy. He was renowned as a painter, a draftsman, an author, and an architect, a true Renaissance man in the Renaissance. Vasari wrote the lives of the most eminent painters, sculptors, and architects, a series of biographies that's filled with gossip about the lives of Renaissance artists, and you can still order it today on Amazon. Lots of dirt and rumors and stories. It's really a fun read. This painting holds its own with the best of the Renaissance, and the story, as my husband would say, is ahead of its time. The subject of this sculpture was drawn from the last days of Pompeii, written in 1834, a widely read novel which centers on the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Here's the story. From her first meeting with Glaucus, the young Athenian blind girl Nydia loves him. It is a story doomed to tragedy. Glaucus saves Nydia from the savage man who owns her, but after he has bought her, he sends her to bear declaration of his love to the beautiful Iona. Nydia has to hear, if not see, the tenderness of the lovers, and then Vesuvius erupts. Because Nydia is blind, her other senses help her find safety for Iona and Glaucus. Most people can't see because of the ash and the dust, but Nydia can hear and smell the sea where a boat awaits to take them to safety. The two lovers are reunited, but in her jealousy and grief, Nydia tragically drowns herself. Nydia, the blind girl of Pompeii, was the most popular American sculpture in the 19th century. According to Rogers, this evocative portrayal of Nydia was replicated 167 times in 2 sizes. Her closed eyes and staff allude to her blindness, while her hand raised to her ear refers to her acute sense of hearing. The destruction of Pompeii is symbolized by the broken Corinthian column beside her right foot. Somehow, this tragic yet heroic love story and this beautiful sculpture hit home with the Americans of their day. The woman in this painting is depicted in a typical neoclassical style. For example, her hair and clothing resemble that of Rome. The stage-like settings and the attention to detail on her robes and the accurate anatomy are illustration of Van Sant's mastery of classicism. Van Sant demonstrates a technical ability unmatched by his contemporaries. In 1790, Van Sant was appointed Master of Drawings to the king. In this painting, Arria is visiting her husband Pietus, who had joined an uprising against the Emperor Claudius and was later imprisoned. Pietus was condemned and given the usual choice for senators: execution and loss of property to his heirs, or suicide. In the end, Arria set an example for her reluctant husband by stabbing herself in the breast first and handing the dagger to him with the words, "Pietus, it doesn't hurt at all." She reminds him that suicide is the honorable option for a Roman prisoner. It was as though she was telling Pietus that his cowardice hurt her more than the dagger. It's an act of personal political protest against the regime. 18th century artists understood the suicide as duty, as honorable, as heroic. Arria is shown in the nobility of profile, and her husband Pietus is shown in dishonor, in disarray, out of emotional control. Who, me? It was an incredibly popular story at the time, with Arria representing a model of strength and moral conduct, a hero. Art has been an integral element of the Catholic identity since the very beginning. The figure of the Madonna is one of the most easily recognizable and most frequently produced images in the history of art. As a rule, Western types of the Madonna from the latter part of the Middle Ages on sought to inspire piety through her beauty and tenderness. Mary is depicted expressing compassion and love. She exudes calmness and warmth. The Virgin Mary represented most of the attributes associated with the feminine in an idealized figure. In the 12th century figure, the seated Virgin Mary assumes a rigid pose that echoes the shape of her chair, making her a throne for her son. Jesus is missing some body parts, but he would have been presented to the people, not interacting with Mary at all. It is a dispassionate Mary, unemotional, detached. She's strictly Queen of Heaven, severe, stiff. Sermons and religious writings of the 11th and 12th centuries describe Mary as the throne of wisdom. During a later period, a chamber was carved into the figure's right shoulder to serve as a container for relics. Although insect damage and structural repairs are evident throughout the work, the shallow cascading drapery folds on the chest and the Virgin's feet make this a superior example of French medieval sculpture. But in the next sculpture, Mary looks affectionately at her son. Both have a sweet smile and are clearly interacting, as opposed to the earlier sculpture. He rides on her hip and plays with the veil framing her face, just like any mother and child. While her figure describes an elegant curve, the solid features and substantial girth of this Virgin provide a satisfying image of maternity. It's much more naturalistic, much more accessible. She is a mother, and we can relate to her much more easily than to the Queen of Heaven. Central to religious art and iconography, depictions of the Virgin Mary date back to the 2nd century. The earliest known representation of the Virgin is a wall painting in the Catacomb of Priscilla in Rome. Yet it wasn't until 431 AD, when the Council of Ephesus officially designated Mary as the Mother of God, that she was given a prominent place in church altar decorations. These depictions reached their height between the 14th and 16th centuries, although they varied in style and representation. By the 15th century, when printmaking became available, prints such as these three were extremely popular. Almost every home had a print that depicted Mary in a graceful and motherly role. These prints by some of the most famous artists in their day show Mary as tender and reverential. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Madonna was most commonly painted enthroned with Jesus on her lap. She could also be surrounded by saints or angels, as you see here. Later depictions express a more tender, intimate moment between a mother and her child. In such representations, Mary is shown holding her baby tenderly. In this painting by Lorenzo di Niccolo, Mary, Christ, and 4 saints stand within a series of gabled panels. In this masterful example of an early 15th century triptych, the saints are separated from the Virgin and Christ in separate compartments, and their names are in the blue border beneath their feet. It doesn't have the precision of later Renaissance figures, and the proportions are off. If Mary would stand up, she would probably be 12 feet tall. The figures are flat and yet moving toward the naturalism of the Renaissance. In a lifelike rendering, this large panel by Piero di Cosimo portrays a sacred conversation, where saints who lived in different centuries surround the Madonna and Child in a unified pictorial space. Piero di Cosimo's approach is far removed from the compartmentalized divisions in Lorenzo di Nicolo's altarpiece. Here, St. Peter represents the kneeling St. Dominic on the left, while St. John the Baptist announces Christ's ministry, and St. Nicholas kneels in devotion on the right. The three smaller panels, called a predella, depict scenes from the lives of Saints Dominic, John's, and Nicholas. That's on the bottom, right down here. It's called the predella. Among the most inventive painters of the Renaissance, Piero di Cosimo is celebrated for what they call, quote, the strangeness of his brain. For centuries, the artist enjoyed a reputation as an eccentric, so devoted to the secrets of art and nature that he abandoned human company and lived a meager existence. According to Vasari, the biographer, he refused to have his house cleaned and subsisted on eggs, which he cooked 50 at a time when he boiled glue. He couldn't stand the babies crying, men coughing, bells ringing, or friars chanting. Increasingly eccentric and reclusive, Piero died in 1522 at the age of 60, probably of the plague. He belonged to no school of painting and operated outside the official artistic milieu. Yet he was talented enough to help Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel and had commissions from European royalty. This is a top-notch altarpiece, one of the best surviving from the period. When in the 14th century, painted altarpieces became common, the Madonna enthroned was a favorite subject for a time. Several centuries later in Italy, the theme focused on a popular, more formal presentation of the Madonna and Child, surrounded by cute little angels like this painting. Salvi's reputation as a 17th century Baroque painter is built almost entirely on his paintings of the Madonna, executed with a remarkable simplicity of color and composition, almost entirely without background scenery. His genius lay in capturing a vision of the Madonna of such exquisite beauty and such exquisite devotion that it set him apart from his other contemporaries. The same face, by the way, appears in almost all of his paintings with little variation. Here you see a sweet devotional painting, preserving the essential intimacy and idealized beauty that influenced his very individualistic style. In the present painting, the Virgin is cradling a sleeping Christ child tenderly in his arms. With his rosy cheeks and plump arms and legs, Jesus appears as a typical healthy baby. He actually looks like a baby, not just a little man. And that was the depiction of baby Jesus for centuries. Mary is shown as a radiant young mother. This image endows the Virgin and Child with human qualities and celebrates the natural maternal bond between mother and infant. This bond is emphasized by the manner in which Mary embraces Jesus, resting her cheek on his head. I think it's really sweet. Images of the Madonna and Child did not end centuries ago. There are many contemporary versions, and this is one of them. In this sculpture, John Storrs treats the traditional subject of the Madonna and Child. Having spent much of his career in France, Storrs reworked his design for a medal honoring French widows and orphans of World War I into this freestanding sculpture. Influenced by Cubism, which you can really see here, Storrs abstracted this familiar subject into a series of fragmented geometric planes, most evident in the chiseled fall of the Madonna's robes and in the angular presentation of the figures. The solidity and strength of form, in addition to the kind of verticality of the piece, gives it kind of an architectural quality. Its reference to skyscrapers is not surprising for stores. Not only did the artist grow up in Chicago under the influence of the city's towering skyline, but he also designed the 31-foot tall sculpture of Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain, which sits atop the Chicago Board of Trade building. Throughout history, there have been paintings and sculptures of working women, whether farming or entertaining or earning a living. Images of the female at work abound. So here are a few. This is an image of a Dutch account keeper with a map on the wall showing Holland as the financial and trading center of the world. Painted during the golden age of Holland, images reflecting Dutch prosperity and commercial success were popular in the 17th century. The room and the objects in it are typical of a 1650s Dutch burgher's home. A large map on the wall of the world hangs on the wall, symbolizing current interest in exploration and trade. Mies painted in a kind of Vermeer-like style, very naturalistic and detailed and very dramatic. Throughout the 1650s, Nicholas Mies explored themes of work and domestic life, including the sleeping woman. This image is not typical, however, for his dozing females are usually young, and the symbolism here is not clear. She may simply be a recent widow struggling to balance her household accounts, or she may be his lazy mother-in-law, who was often his model. In this painting, you can see two women in bright, fancy dresses toiling in an atmosphere of dense steam clouds in a laundry. Jean-Honoré Fragonard, a favorite artist at the French court, often chose working class people as subjects. Here he captures the demanding physical labor that washing clothes required, most notably in the figure carrying a heavy bundle. The artist makes visible the intense heat of the kettle. Contemporary laundry treatises recommended a 17-hour process with the temperature near boiling. However, as you can see, it's not a real commentary on the back-breaking work of peasants. In the foreground of the painting on the right, children are playing, and the laundresses are dressed to the nines, not what you would expect in a working laundry. Fragonard developed an exuberant and inventive manner as a painter, draftsman, and printmaker. He worked largely for rich Parisians, including Mesdames Pompadour and de Berry. His paintings reflect the loose morals of 18th century France. Fragonard became very successful for his erotic paintings. He was ruined after the Revolution, but spared the guillotine. After the French Revolution, he held administrative positions at the Louvre, but his work had fallen from favor and he died in relative obscurity in 1806. Today, his work is prized as an example of the frivolous and playful style of the 18th century French court. Winslow Homer introduced the post-war American independent woman. She rode horseback, played croquet, and was a worker with dignity. The schoolhouse was actually one of the few places women were able to maintain a foothold in the working world when the soldiers returned from the war. Teaching was considered a respectable profession, a position of trust and authority. This is kind of interesting. By 1870, women teachers outnumbered men 2-1. Town school systems, financed by local taxes, were started by the Puritans in New England. A 1647 law required towns of 50 families to hire a school teacher so children could read the Bible and not fall into evil ways. A one-room schoolhouse was common. All boys sat together on one side and girls on the other. The teacher called groups in the front to recite lessons and make sure they behaved. By 1871, the one-room schoolhouse was kind of gone. This painting, in essence, was nostalgia for happier times. The themes that most interested Winslow Homer throughout the 70s were rural life, childhood, and the disappearing one-room schoolhouse. This picture is filled with an array of details, students in various states of attentiveness, fresh flowers on the teacher's desk, and wilted ones on the floorboards, lunch pails in a far corner, the teacher's hat hanging on a nail from above the chalkboard, and the warm glow of sunlight shining through the windows. Within the carefully organized composition, the teacher commands the room from her desk. Homer was a self-taught magazine illustrator in Boston during the 1850s. He painted country life and painted simple activity in familiar surrounds with warmth and quiet charm. His images show authentic characters in their native environments without overt sentimentality. This painting captures children unhappily confined in a schoolroom on a warm spring day, bored pupils who wiggle their bare toes, wishing they were somewhere else. There is the good boy who knows his lesson, the sulky boy who does not, the studious boy with the hole in his knee, and the crying boy. One boy on a tour that I had last couple of years ago before COVID said that this little boy was crying because somebody probably ate his lunch, which I thought was really sweet. Homer's painting becomes a window revealing a portrait of a woman working in a fleeting moment in history. Julian Dupree was born in Paris. His father was a jeweler, and it was expected that he would enter the family business. However, his parents were forced to close their shop due to the War of 1870 and the siege of Paris. With time on his hands, Dupree began taking evening courses at the art school. And Dupree trained as an academic painter and developed a style featuring impeccable draftsmanship and rich color. By the 1880s, France's agricultural economy was suffering difficulties. But Julian Dupree presented an idealized view of attractive peasants happily at work in the fields. Here, a young woman arranges hay to create stacks which will be loaded onto the cart behind her. The rendering of the stormy sky perhaps indicates Dupree's sensitivity to the economic conditions of the time. Throughout his career, Dupree championed the life of the peasant and continued painting scenes like this one in the areas of Normandy and Brittany. In 1883, Van Gogh settled in a small village in the Netherlands where his father was a minister. There he observed the lives of peasants, and he established himself as a painter of working people. He painted over 40 heads, dark, coarse, and unidealized. This study was part of a preparatory study for the large, famous painting, The Potato Eaters, which is to the right. It's located in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. In these dark paintings with heavy application of paint, Van Gogh sought to capture the effects of lighting to emphasize the condition of the working peasant. The painting was Van Gogh's first attempt to produce a masterwork which would establish his reputation. Having barely mastered the art of painting, the task he set himself was virtually beyond his reach. Portraying 5 figures and making them look natural is impossible for an unpracticed hand, while achieving the effects of light cast by an oil lamp made the project even more difficult. His use of color was no less ambitious, for he wanted to render a kind of gloomy interior as brightly as possible. Van Gogh had made preparations well in advance. He produced numerous portrait studies and several composition sketches in charcoal and oil before tackling the definitive canvas. This is one of them. Vincent van Gogh always felt sympathy for the peasant classes, and here tenderly depicted the full sunburned features of a young working peasant woman. Her cap in subtle shades of white and blue is pulled around her head, while her eyes are enlivened by white highlights. Van Gogh's muted tones that you see here are very different from his later use of bright color that followed his arrival in France in 1886. The Little Dancer is one of the most recognizable images of the working female in the museum. A ballet student of the Paris Opera, Marie van Goghen, daughter of a tailor and laundress, is an ordinary girl who is able to escape life on the Paris streets. These girls were known as opera rats because they scurried around in tiny steps. But the derogatory association of rats with dirt and sewage is unavoidable. The opera was essentially, for them, a step up from prostitution. Young, pretty, and poor, the ballet students were targets of male protectors. Men could buy tickets to watch them dress, and probably more. Marie struggles for her dignity. Her head is held high. Degas made a wax sculpture, then dressed it in real fabric. When the sculpture was first exhibited, all were shocked by the innovative realism in the real fabric. Dolls wore fabric clothing, not sculpture. This was unheard of. So it was panned by critics and the public, and Degas never exhibited another sculpture in his lifetime. After his death in the early 1920s, his heirs made bronze casts of the wax original and sold 24 of them to museums and collectors. That's where ours come from. In the context of the evolution of sculpture, The Little Dancer is a groundbreaking work of art. The idea that any medium or technique can be used to convey a desired effect can be traced back to this sculpture. Degas represented a working class girl with realism and simplicity. Paul Conoyer painted the plaza after the rain in 1908, just a year after the famous Plaza Hotel's establishment. Here, a woman walking with children composes roughly 1/4 of the canvas, while the further distance buildings, vehicles, monuments, and sky constitute the rest of the painting. The Plaza Hotel, the most recognizable building in the image, frames the right side of the piece. Paul Conoyer was born in 1864 in St. Louis and attended St. Louis School of Fine Arts. He stylistically depicts the streets with short and fluttering brushstrokes, which achieves a sort of misty appearance and creates the instances of reflection on the pavement. The urban streets seem rather orderly, and the skies above have cleared from the assumed storm that might have just hit the city. Conoyer employs several stylistic nods to the French Impressionists, with this is thin brushstrokes and manipulation of the light and weather particles. It's an idealized depiction of New York. He rarely depicts a street or a park that is crowded with people. Instead, he focuses on cleansed streets and appreciating the brilliant architecture. He often depicts the sturdy buildings and trees in sharper definition, while the moving figures and atmospheric elements are less sharply defined, with a distinct kind of impressionistic quality. He generates dimensionality through atmospheric and linear perspective as the background kind of disappears into a hazy blur due to the rain that fell upon the city. Now, this figure that we see here, this woman, cannot possibly be a depiction of an upper class woman who lives in the neighborhood. Society women would not have been allowed in the outside world without a chaperone. So she's probably a nanny working for the children of the elite who live in the mansions lining Fifth Avenue, kind of like Mary Poppins. It's an amazing painting. Just by looking at it, you can smell the freshness in the air and sense the moisture in the rain. You can hear the young children's voices and the people and the carriages and the trolley and the Grand Army Plaza near Central Park. It is a fan favorite. It's a beautiful piece. The dramatic brushstrokes and bold coloring of this portrait are hallmarks of Robert Henry's best work. The artist avoided traditional portrait commissions and preferred to select his own models from the working classes. Spanish dancer Batalo Rubino became one of Henry's preferred models. This is a portrait of a flamenco dancer in a dramatic pose. He gives her a full-length, huge portrait like nobility or royalty, but she is lower class, and so this image is meant to kind of rattle the viewer. Her chin is dropped, and she fixes her gaze on the viewer with seductive eyes in a suggestive pose. I wish I had had the nerve to wear a dress like that. It is as alluring as the red shoes protruding from under her skirt. Henry tended to create his images with energetic slashes of paint and combinations of kind of acidic and vivid colors, as you see here. Henry worked with great speed. His personal expression is manifested in his portraiture, mainly single figure compositions that confront the viewer. Colorful people from all walks of life were a mainstay of his work. He referred to them as my people. Henry changed his name after his father, a riverboat gambler, fled following a murder. He had a far-reaching influence as a teacher and artist advocate. Henry is best known as the leader of the Eight, the anti-establishment artist whose 1908 breakaway exhibition led to the formation of the Ashcan School, one of the earliest modernist movements in American art. It's a perfect name for a movement that embraced subject matter that was urban and sometimes gritty or unattractive, eschewing the romantic approach that had previously typified American art. It is 1939 in Chicago. The Depression is still on. There are fewer jobs for African Americans. This woman has been evicted and stands proudly, chin up, well dressed. Her few possessions are in her suitcase and carpet bag on the ground. The city is bright with color, but looks as if it's falling down. She cradles a healthy green plant as a symbol that not all hope has died. So she is optimistic. She will find another job and another place to live. Celebrated for his paintings of Black women, Elzéar Cortot was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1916. His father, a successful electrician, frustrated by Southern racism, decided to move the family to Chicago in 1917. The Chicago Black Renaissance was fueled by the great migration of 6 million Blacks from the rural communities in the South to urban cities in the North and West, in search of economic opportunity and security from the lynch mobs and crisis of the Depression. Elzéar Cortot stated, "The Black woman represents the Black race. She is the Black spirit. She conveys a feeling of eternity and continuance of life." Cortot returned time and time again to the female figure, embodied as this woman is, as a quiet, regal woman determined not to let obstacles get the better of her. Her face is not delineated, not descriptive. She could be anyone. We could be her. A woman named Christina poses in front of what appears to be a towering heap of trash. On closer inspection, desirable consumer goods such as a pink car are identifiable among the rubbish. The title of this painting refers to an American artist, Andrew Wyatt's realistic painting, Christina's World from 1948, in which a white woman crawls up a grassy hill toward a barn in the distance. In contrast, Robert Colescott represented Christina as an African-American woman standing boldly upright and smiling on her day off from work. Here, Colescott both appropriated and critiqued stereotyped imagery, prompting conversations around ideas of consumerism, race, and gender. Colescott tells his tale with tongue in cheek. She's dressed to the nines, another proud Black woman. Colescott claims she would say, "If I ever let my head down, it would be to admire my shoes." While the culture behind her is shrinking into the mud, she is not. She is rising above all the chaos in her life, not being dragged down into the madness all around her. There are interesting references here that you can't easily see on the slide. You really have to visit it in person. It's very difficult to see butter and guns or hammer and sickles or clocks that have stopped telling time or shoes without laces or broken appliances or dead plants and bicycles without wheels. Our culture is in shambles. It's in disarray. It's in the dumps. But she is not. Born in 1903 in St. Louis, Walker Evans is considered the progenitor of the documentary tradition in American photography. His principal subjects were people found in roadside stands, cheap cafes, simple bedrooms, and small town main streets. For 50 years, from the late 1920s to the early 1970s, Evans recorded the American scene, creating a visual catalog of modern America in the making. Evans documented rural communities during the Depression. From their first appearance in magazines and books in the late 1930s, these iconic images entered the public's collective consciousness and are now deeply embedded in the nation's shared visual history of the Depression. A great deal is known about 27-year-old Allie Mae Burroughs, whose portrait is one of the most iconic images of the Depression. She was a poor sharecropper's wife and the mother of four. Her family owned nothing, not their home, not their land, mules, farm tools, all of which they leased from their landlord. Burroughs was a cotton sharecropper. In 1935, the family had ended the year $12 in debt. It is this portrait, with kind of the psychological ambiguity of a Mona Lisa, which seized upon by early reviewers as one of the quintessential images of the 30s in rural America. Alberto Giacometti is best known for his elongated, skinny, withered representations of the human form, including his 1960 sculpture, Walking Man 1, which in 2010 broke the record for a sculpture at auction at $104 million. Giacometti was born in a remote Swiss valley in 1901, the son of a successful, conventionally realist Swiss painter. He made his first sculpture of his brother Diego at the age of 13 and swiftly dedicated himself to art. In 1922, he moved to Paris, where he discovered surrealism, stopped modeling from life, and devoted himself to dreamlike visions. After experimenting with cubism and surrealism, Giacometti began making radical, skinny version of the human form. In his final years, though, he concentrated on painting, producing a series of rather frenzied portraits of his final muse and mistress, who called herself Caroline. Giacometti met Caroline at the end of 1958. He was 57, she was 20, working as a flourishing prostitute. In any case, she became the female model with which Giacometti became most obsessed, and also his regular companion in the evenings, at nightclubs, and in the apartment that he eventually bought for her. Annette, Giacometti's wife and model for many years, naturally hated this, and there were terrible scenes. But Caroline posed for Giacometti virtually every evening. Here, her face takes on more importance. While the background and the body of the model are barely sketched with light strokes, the face is worked on insistently and repeatedly until becoming kind of dense and black, sculpted like an African mask. Moreover, it is set off by an ochre kind of halo that strongly contrasts with the rest of the background. Her personality, her beauty is really captured in the 30 portraits that he made of her. His late work is defined by this more reductive, sketchy quality. This is actually one of my favorites of the period. I love its sketchiness and freedom and almost hurried character of the painting. So let's now turn to our last portion, which is women of leisure. Most members of the ruling and wealthy class, this final group of portraits, focus on women of leisure, mainly on their prestige and prominence in their position in society. However, by the mid-19th century, portraits could be of the everyday woman, not just those of the upper class. So here are some images of women with time to spare. During the reign of Louis the XIV, where court attendants vied to be present during the king's morning toilette, images set in the bedroom or boudoir were appropriate for the display of wealth and power. The nobility rose late. Women spent most of the day preparing for evening festivities. Women would meet with men in the state of half dress, and the men would be fully clothed. It was a kind of power thing. The artist would be given the dress for the portrait, and the model wore it for tedious sittings. Women would only sit personally for the portrait of their face. Nicolas Largelière, painter of this portrait, assumed prominence at the court with a roster of clients that included many wealthy citizens. This woman, whose identity remains unknown, presents herself amid the objects that enhance her beauty and define her wealth, her taste, and her status. This wealthy, elegant, unknown woman is surrounded by luxurious objects. The lavish table, the imported Chinese porcelain vase, the lustrous beads in her hair, and the delicate satins and substantial laces of her gown were frequent motifs in Largelière's art and were particularly popular among the moneyed society that employed him. She is represented by a gold cupid on the table as Venus, goddess of beauty, and might be a mistress or courtesan, as the curtain suggests a bed behind her. But perhaps there's another theme here, fading beauty, which might be represented by the wilting flowers that you see in the vase here. Jean-Marc Natier's father was a portrait painter, and his mother painted miniatures. Young Jean-Marc studied with them and attended the Royal Academy, soon winning a prize for drawing. He made oil and pastel portraits, mostly of women, often turning his sitters into Greek or Roman gods and goddesses in a theatrical mythological setting. He became the painter of the artificial ladies of Louis XV's court. Financial problems and illness finally caused him to stop painting in 1762. Natier's graceful and charming portraits of court ladies in this mythological mode were very fashionable, partly because he could beautify a sitter while also retaining her likeness. Conformity rather than individuality was a hallmark of Natier's enormous success, portraying French aristocratic women such as you see here. His numerable portraits represent contrasting ivory skin, bright blush, powdered hair, and soft features. This woman wears extremely elegant clothing, and her hairstyle is intricately adorned with small flowers. Her clothing is so soft that the viewer can imagine the texture, and her face is pale with a blush emphasizing her femininity. The flowers all throughout the work give the painting an overall playful feeling. A towering figure in the second half of the 19th century, Edouard Manet was a dedicated artist, strongly committed to transforming his medium into a record of contemporary life, particularly his portraits. Throughout his lifetime, Manet surrounded himself with a wide circle of friends, admirers, and supporters who inevitably found his way onto their canvases. This pastel depicts Jeanne Guyama, who along with her husband Jules were proprietors of a fashionable shop in Paris. The Guillemets were counted among Manet's many acquaintances, and Manet Guillemet sat for a number of works by the artist completed near the end of his life. As a paragon of Parisian chic, Madame Guillaume is a quintessential example of Manet's late practice. As the owner of a fashion boutique, she would have been considered the ideal subject in the artist's search for the modern woman. The artist relished in depicting the fashions, accessories, and settings of the modern era. Manet was praised by critics for his skill in conjuring accurate and realistic portrayals of modern people wearing the correct dress, displaying the proper attitude, and occupying the appropriate milieu for their social economic status. Madame Guillaume is executed with a quick flurry of varied strokes of pastels, transferred to the canvas with seemingly sparseness and not much detail. She has an erect posture and her face displays no emotion. She seems almost disinterested. And the stark contrast of her skin tone to the background in her dress makes her even colder. Keeping with the artistic trends of the time, Manet used very little modeling or shadow, rather relying on color to indicate character and define the subject. He creates the subtle character of Madame Guillaume with the most economical means. Manet said this portrait portrayed the elegance of a fashionable life. Famed for his sensual nudes and charming scenes of pretty women, Renoir was one of the leading painters of the Impressionist group. He evolved a technique of broken brushstrokes and used a bold combination of pure complementary colors to capture the light and movement of his landscapes and figures. Renoir began his artistic career as a porcelain painter. However, his ambitions to become a professional artist were answered when he eventually met Claude Monet, Frédéric Bazille, and Alfred Sisley. The four friends soon began painting together, and after several of his paintings were rejected by the Salon in the early 1870s, Renoir decided to join Monet in establishing an independent artist society, the Impressionists. They sought to capture modern life, and Renoir's work from this period focused on everyday people, streets, and surrounding. Art was never the same again. Renoir's penchant for portraiture attracted the attention of a range of patrons with avant-garde sensibilities. His early works were typically snapshots of real life, full of sparkling color and light. In this painting, Renoir used soft, feathery brushstrokes, and edges of the painting is covered with patches of color, particularly in his representation of the background floral wallpaper. Some critics call Renoir a celebrator of beauty and especially feminine sensuality. And some have said this is a kind of saucy portrait. But to me, she looks rather dreamy. Renoir was so passionate about painting that he even continued when he was old and suffering from severe arthritis. He then painted with the brush tied to his wrists. Renoir said that his goal as a painter was to put joy on people's walls, and most people think that he succeeded. American artist William Merritt Chase, a renowned figure in the international art circles of the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, was a brilliant observer of contemporary life, an innovative painter, and an influential teacher. In 1872, Chase began attendance at the Royal Academy in Munich, where he acquired the flashy old master style with a dark palette, which characterized his work throughout his life. And you can see that here. Once he settled into Manhattan, Chase rented studio space in the old 10th Street studios. At great expense, he converted the studio into an exotic showplace, which became a social center for the local artistic fraternity. The gesture enhanced his reputation as a genteel bohemian and also attracted numerous prestigious and remunerative portrait commissions. Chase was, in fact, a successful society portraitist. He painted fashionable women for a fee of $2,000 each. This painting depicts his studio, sumptuous tapestries exotic metalwork, imported porcelains, fine art, and elegantly adorned patrons were sure to be found in the studios of artists such as Chase at the end of the 19th century. Appreciating and being seen appreciating such exquisite finery was an important cultural and social marker for both patron and artist. An invitation to a reception at Chase's studio was sure to be in the society news and was the most sought after invitation in New York City. This woman was upper crust, out by herself, unaccompanied. The dog stands in for her husband as protector. She is there on business, looking to hire him to do a painting. She's an independent woman, but still feminine, sitting in a man's club chair while the dog on her dress shows affluence that she could let the dress go and the independence of a modern woman. Chase was also considered a trailblazer in his appreciation of women artists. Chase's modern thinking extended to his mentoring of female students, proclaiming that, quote, genius has no sex. Chase advised male and female students equally and actively collected art by women at a time when this was not the norm. Waiting for guests, ready for the ball, who will be my partner for dinner tonight? So many questions would have been asked by this American socialite, painted by Anders Zorn, Sweden's leading painter at the turn of the century. He gained national acclaim as the Swedish impressionist. Zorn gained a reputation for his skillfully executed portraits and became known for his ability to capture the individual characteristics of his subjects. He notably painted portraits of 3 US presidents, William Taft, Grover Cleveland, and Theodore Roosevelt. He enjoyed great commercial success as a painter of the rich and famous in the high society at the turn of the century in America. In the mid-1890s, he visited St. Louis, where he received commissions to paint several prominent notables, including the sitter here, who was the wife of a local cotton broker, Duncan Joy. The painting highlights Zorn's virtuoso impressionist brushwork. The sitter relaxes on a green armchair while her left hand plays with a ribbon on the sleeves of her dress. His paintings, for the most part, show a restrained and controlled use of color. Much of the detail has been simplified. His paintings appear incredibly realistic, yet they have a sense of effortlessness about them. If you look up close, the strokes appear broad and general, but as a whole, it appears incredibly realistic. Zorn's subjects seem unaware of his presence, sort of going about their day-to-day lives. As with many of his portraits, Lucy Turner Joy, a lady of leisure, seems unaware of Zorn's presence. Schooled in Paris, Thomas Dewing was noted for his figure paintings of upper crust women. He was a founding member of the 10 American painters, also known as the 10, which included Charles Cézanne, who we saw earlier, I think last month. And he taught at the Art Students League in New York. By the late 1880s, Dewing had formed his basic style and subject matter. Elegant, refined women portrayed in an extremely limited range of colors and placed in sparse interiors. His brushwork was soft and blurred. His figures are languid and thin and tend not to do a thing. Now, thinness was a craze at the time, and women would take arsenic to get thinner. This was the proper image of a woman in the upper class. She was frail and she needs support of her man. Dewing's paintings were characterized by mood and poetic impulse rather than an objective transcription of reality. Here, Dewing depicts an upper class woman in a moment of domestic leisure. The woman appears detached and isolated, both physically and psychologically. She kind of blends into her surroundings, reducing her role to a largely decorative one and communicating an overall feeling of kind of bourgeois ease. In this painting, an elegant woman artfully poses in profile. She seems absorbed in her own thoughts. In late 19th century America, the Gilded Age, women were understood to maintain ideals of truth and beauty. In this painting, the woman embodies a timeless, unattainable beauty. She's presented to us more as an object to be enjoyed for its refinement, sort of like the graceful empire sofa she's sitting on, her antique gown that she's wearing, and the magnificent gilded table. Frieseke is best known for his images of women painted in short, vigorous strokes and in brilliant, saturated hues. He also depicted the intimate domestic life of women in quiet interior scenes. In this work, loose brushstrokes in the Impressionist style depict the striking mauve tones of the couch and rug, as well as the room's smaller details. The accent pillows, the screen in the corner, and a tabletop of flowers and figurine. Look at this scene and see what kind of stuff you can have. It screams of consumerism. At the height of his career in the 1910s and 20s, Frieseke was one of, if not the most popular of all living American artists. He received numerous awards and medals and saw his work purchased by private collectors and major museums. Female figures, flowers, and domestic interiors and exteriors were the recurring images of his paintings. One prominent observer described them as sentimental confections characterized by their sweet and sugary coloration. Born in Newfoundland, Canada, Maurice Prendergast spent much of his life in Boston, where the picturesque landscapes and seascapes in and around the vibrant city provided the perfect setting for his repertoire of leisure subjects at play. Armed with portable watercolors, Prendergast would slip in and out of beachfront crowds or promenading families in the park unnoticed. Prendergast was one of the first American painters to adopt a post-impressionist style. His distinctive paintings utilize a pattern of flat, short brushstrokes and bold outlines to create brightly colored scenes of outdoor leisure. His watercolors, monotypes, and oil paintings represent people pursuing leisure activities, mainly on beaches and city streets. The landscapes and figures are simplified with a patchwork of color, producing a patterned or kind of decorative effects. Now, the slide looks pixelated, but that was his style, not a problem with the image. It looks like this in person. So Prendergast's energetic, almost festive atmosphere is achieved through the use of kind of mosaic-like brushstrokes and bold, shimmering colors. Prendergast was drawn to impressionist subjects of people at leisure at parks, boulevards, and cafes. A shy and retiring individual, he remained a bachelor throughout his life. Despite declining health and the complete loss of hearing, Prendergast continued to paint for as long as he was physically able. He received a prestigious honor shortly before his death. Seriously ill and in the hospital, he humbly responded that, "I'm glad they found out that I'm not crazy anyway." Our last piece today is Young Woman in Green by William Glackens. Glackens invigorated American painting, bringing in the observational skills learned as a newspaper illustrated to new urban subjects. He was an able recorder of the rhythm and details that comprised daily life for urban dwellers in early 20th century America. Glackens, along with Henry, who painted the exotic dancer that we looked at a few minutes ago, was founding member of the group of artists known as the Eight, also referred to as the Ashcan School. But Glackens differed from his colleagues by focusing more on scenes of leisure and entertainment rather than on the slums of the Lower East Side. He was also unapologetic for his admiration of European painting and popularized the quick brushstroke and bright palettes of the Impressionists among American audiences. An admirer of French Impressionism, Glackens adopted the free brushstrokes and brilliant color of his role models. Known as the American Renoir, he reinterpreted the Impressionist focus on modern Paris by depicting similar scenes from 20th century New York. Rather than cafe culture in the boulevard, he painted nightclubs, department stores, and crowded slums. His version of these scenes helped popularize an American Impressionist movement. Glackens favored light colors and feathery ribbon-like brushwork, reminiscent of the paintings of Renoir. The soft brushstrokes seem well suited to the plush cushion, downy blanket, and hat plume, as well as to the dreamy mood of the model. She, however, is not the figure of the complacent wife that we saw in the Frieseke painting of the woman on the pastel sofa. Here she is a modern woman, holding a hat, ready to go outside into the world. So these past two programs have shown that the representation of women in art have been and continues to evolve. We've looked at many images of women, from royalty and nobility in the court to the working woman and loving wife and mother, from the courageous heroine to compassionate religious saints, to the woman at leisure, the whore, and the courtesan, all informing us about the woman's place and status in their society, and all in the context of works at Slam. I hope this gave you a sense of the complexity of the subject, but also an appreciation of the creativity and beauty and artistry of these masterworks. And I hope you'll be able to make time to see them soon in person. With that being said, our next three presentations will feature women artists in the St. Louis Art Museum's permanent collection. These are incredible, and their lives are so interesting. They will blow you away. I actually had no concept that there were as many women artists at the museum as we have. And I know you find them really, really fascinating. So stay safe. I hope to see you next time. And let me know, do we have any?
Yeah, Dale, we do have a couple of questions, couple of
Sure.
comments. The first one was from Sid Goldstein. Did they have brownies in the 16th century?
Well,
that's a question. And
okay,
then we have from Kay Sherman. When you say that every home had a print that depicted Mary, how costly were such prints, and what kinds of homes are you referring to?
well, I don't think I'm referring to every home. I mean, these, but they were very inexpensive and very, very affordable for most people. And it also, of course, depends on who the artist was. Sometimes, as if you were looking at a print by Rembrandt, that may not have been affordable. But if you're looking at a print by, an artist who really wasn't very well known, those could have been. And they were just really a way in which most people were able to have some kind of art in their home. Obviously, people who were struggling just to put food on the table weren't going to be buying art, but those who had extra income, even just a little, could have afforded to buy some of these prints. They were not that expensive.
Al Finkelstein said he visited Van Gogh's museum in Amsterdam, and the Potato Eaters is beautiful, as are all of Van Gogh's works. And following that, Kathleen Sitzer asks, where are the individual heads from Potato Eaters located?
They're all over.
Mm-hmm.
We have one, different museums have others. I think, there were like 40 different heads of them that he painted, and different museums have them, different private owners have them. But speaking of Van Gogh, have any of you been to the Van Gogh exhibition out on, anybody raise your hand? the one that's on, in the
It's in
parking lot.
Galleria.
The
It's in, it's,
Galleria.
yeah.
Yeah. Is it still there? I think it
I
still
think
is.
it's still there. I think they might have extended the date a little bit, but I haven't been. I know a couple people that haven't, say that it's fabulous.
It is
It's
really an
probably a,
experience. I mean, I would recommend it. It's just something that it is so creative, and it's immersive. It's just a very different experience. And what's fascinating is that they could take maybe a 2-inch little square piece out of a painting that he might have painted, and blow it up to maybe 40 feet tall, 30 feet tall, and it's in clear focus.
oh,
So
wow.
you're able to see these brush strokes in it's really well done. It's a lot of, it's very, very enjoyable. You're not on top of one another. If it's still there and you can get in and you haven't seen it, go early before it gets real crowded. I would really suggest it. It's just a totally different art experience. It really is.
Thank you. Well, one other thing, Al Finkelstein says, another great informational presentation, Dale. You are a woman of art knowledge. Wishing you and everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, safe and happy Thanksgiving. So thank you, everyone.
That sounds like a really good ending, Al. A happy Thanksgiving. We have a lot to be thankful for this year. So everyone have a good Thanksgiving and a good Hanukkah, which is
Yeah, it comes up really quick too.
Yeah.
It's early
Thanks,
this year.
everybody.
Thank
And
you,
I'm
everyone.
telling you, next, be ready for these women artists. They are unbelievable and they are inspiring. So we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot.
everyone. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Dale. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.